Have you ever been faced with a life or death matter? Has any of you ever been faced with a life or death matter? I think throughout our lifetime that definition changes. I remember when I was a senior in high school, whether I was going to get a date to the prom or not was a life or death matter. My grandson, our grandson, is now the same age as I was when I was wondering about a prom date. And he is 17 and he still doesn't have his driver's license. So he's been busy with extracurricular activities and that's been fine. Suddenly he's got a little free time and it has become a life. It's a driver's license. In fact, he calls his Nana just about every day, say, when are we going to register? Well, the good news is tomorrow TJ goes for his driving lessons. Life and death situations, they kind of ramp up, don't they? Remember the life and death situations of the first half of our lives? They were a lot around the right job, how to raise our children, maybe even investments and things like that. And now they've ramped up again, have they not? Whether to get a medical procedure, whether to not. Whether to stay in independent living or whether to move where you can get some more assistance. The question is, we ask now is, do I let go? When will I get to see Jesus? They become life and death situations. Moses led the people, the Hebrew people, through life and death decisions. They could have decided to stay in captivity. There was a known quantity to be captive, to not have any freedom, but they decided, with God's help, to escape, to get away from captivity. And all throughout the 40 years that they wandered in the desert, it was a constant question of life and death questions. Do I go or do I stop? Do I obey or do I do it my way? The question was, will we ever get to the promised land? In a way, we still ask that question today. What will it take for us to get to the promised land? Life and death decisions. And for the most part, we have freedom around what we choose. We can choose God, or we cannot choose God. In Deuteronomy chapter 30, we see Moses, and hear Moses speaking on behalf of God. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient, and if you are not drawn away to bow down to if you are drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you are crossing to go in from the Jordan and to enter and to possess. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life, and he will give you many years in the land that I swore to give your fathers, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses makes a strong case for following God. But yet again, he offers them freedom. He says, you're free to do what you want to do. Just realize the consequences of your ways. Joshua was following Moses, and Joshua actually led the people into the promised land. And when he did, he said, this day, me and my family, we choose to follow God. We choose to follow God. Fast forward, and Jesus tells us the gate is narrow. You can go with the crowd. You're free to do that. Or you're free to follow Jesus. And I would propose to you this morning, as Moses did thousands of years before, is that to follow God, to follow Jesus, does give you freedom. Does, in fact, give you freedom. Because to not follow are consequences. Consequences for our sins. Where we're separated from God. And at the end of the day, that's not the place you want to be. Now, I talked to you today, and maybe this morning as you hear a sermon, you might think, oh yeah, those decisions are easy. They're easy. No, they're not. They're very difficult. They're hard. Sometimes it's much easier to turn your back on God for the moment, but then there's consequences that come for that. So we have a choice today. We are free to choose whether God or God. And what I mean by that is God with a capital G or God with a small g. Moses gave the people at the time, and we still have this today, the Shema, that we love God with our whole heart, our whole mind, our whole being. We can do that. We can choose to do that, or we can choose to have other gods. When we turn our face away from God, which is in fact the very definition of sin, what we find out is we start to look for other replacements. I know I do. When I feel distant from God, my human nature kicks in, and then I look for replacements for God. Gods with a little g. Stuff. Experiences. Those kinds of things. Remember, Moses had led the people, the Hebrew people, and as he did, they knew that his messages were coming from God. Moses went up on Sinai to get the law, to get the commandments, and as soon as he turned his back, what did they do? They found another god. They put all their gold together and they made this calf, and they started to worship a golden calf. And it brought about destruction. See, for us as well, when we start to worship our golden calves, and you have to decide for yourself, I have my own set of golden calves. And I would imagine you all have your own set of golden calves. Things that when you turn your back from God, you start to worship. So we have a choice today. We have a choice between God with a capital G or gods with a small g. We have a choice today. We have the freedom today to decide whether to live with fear or to live with courage. Moses took the Hebrew people on a 40-year walk. They walked, and their goal was the promised land. But in the midst of that, they turned away quite a bit, and it's why we look back, it's why it took 40 years. It took what seem like forever because they would not, on a day-to-day basis, walk with God. They started to want their own way of doing things. I didn't have time to look at it, but maybe some of you hymnal experts might be able to help me. Is how many times in our hymnal is the word walk in there? We're always talking about walking with God, walking with Jesus. I want to walk where Jesus walked. Well, it's a nice sentiment, but a lot of times instead of walking with God and having courage, knowing that even though if we walk into the most difficult situation that God is with us, we choose instead to have fear. To have fear. Fear comes in our hearts when we no longer identify with God, but we start to identify with others. That we're fearful because others may have something to say about us. Others may go against us. Others may not, in fact, like us. But we are called to identify ourselves, to have our self-identification with God through Jesus Christ, and because of that, we can have courage. No matter what situation you find yourself in, you can define yourself as, I'm a child of God, and I can get through this. In fear quickly gets us to hate. To hate. We have a choice between hate and love. We're free to choose. We're free to choose. And it seems that we live in a world, we've always kind of lived in a world where the world is very easily choosing hate over love, grounded in fear. Hate is grounded in fear. I just shake my head, maybe you did in the past couple weeks, is that two young people driven by hate because they had been convinced in their life to fear people who look different from them, and in order to be hateful, they had a plot to go to the Baltimore area and blow up a number of power stations in order that the people that they hated, that someone told them to hate, someone that they feared, would not have electrical service. Does that even make logic or sense? But yet, it's the world we live in. Always finding new ways to be hateful. Looking a world so desperate for folks who are followers of Jesus Christ to find more ways to be loving, even when love is difficult. Even when it's people that make us feel uncomfortable. Even when we find ourselves uncomfortable ourselves around certain people in certain situations. To remember in the midst of that, our identification is in Jesus Christ. Is in Jesus Christ. Well, this morning, folks, we have choices. We always have had choices. We have freedom. We can choose life, or we can choose death. And I'm not just talking about physical death. I'm talking about the death in your life that you choose that separates you from this relationship with God. Your homework this week is to decide what those choices are and what you're doing with those choices. Are you choosing God with a capital G, or God's with a small g? Fear or courage? Hate or love? You have the freedom to choose.